Mental Health within PBIS webinar. We're happy to have everyone with us today, and we have quite a bit of content to cover in 1 hour, so we will get started. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. So I'm Stephanie Skolasinski. I'm a Technical Assistance Coordinator for the Wisconsin RtI Center with a focus on PBIS, and also presenting today is Elizabeth Cook.
Hello everybody, my name is Elizabeth Cook. I am the School Mental Health Consultant for the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction.
So our backup support today is Jennifer Grinke, and she's another Technical Assistance Coordinator. She will be monitoring the chat box, which we'll talk about in a minute, and she's going to be helping behind the scenes. So this is the control panel. Hopefully you see this or something really similar to it on your screen. We have 200 people registered today. So we have everyone muted except for the organizers. There is a chat box, so if you have any questions or want to chat any of us, you can. To open the chat box, you click on the X next to where it says chat, and that should open a small window where you can type and send a message. So go ahead and try opening your chat box now. Please note that we will be going through the content first and answering questions if there's time at the end. The previous slide has our contact information, so please email with any questions you may have that we do not answer on the call. You can also open the materials box that's right above or really near your chat box by clicking the plus sign next to materials, and there are 2 materials in there. One is this webinar, and the second one is a tool that we're going to refer to a little bit later on during the webinar. You should have an icon that looks like a hand. If we decide to ask you a question, we might ask you to raise your hand to answer. And you just click on that icon. Go ahead and click on that icon now. Yay, some of you are raising your hand. And then to put your hand down, you just click on the icon again. So go ahead and put your hand down. Great. Today we will discuss the components of the Wisconsin School Mental Health Framework and learn how school mental health policies, practices, and procedures can be embedded within the PBIS framework. We will talk about a companion guide to the Tiered-Fidelity Inventory, which is a PBIS fidelity measure. And this companion guide can help to guide action planning for embedding school mental health. Before we leave today, we ask that you identify at least one action to further your school's or district's journey to embed social emotional learning within your already existing system. If you're not from a school or district, define an action in which you can support schools or districts in this work. So before we get going on the content, we want to acknowledge that this is a big topic. An hour on this topic provides a quick overview and some tools you can use to help guide the work. We acknowledge that embedding school mental health within your system entails much more professional development and time to actually work the work. So let's start by looking at Wisconsin's vision for a culturally responsive multi-level system of support. An academic RtI system and a behavior system together with infused culturally responsive practices form one system, a culturally responsive multi-level system of support. Wisconsin's definition of this is systematically providing equitable services, practices, and resources to all students based upon their responsiveness to effective instruction and intervention. Wisconsin uses this graphic to represent the system's view of a culturally responsive multi-level system of support. And there are 8 components or key system level components or features of a school fully implementing a responsive framework in any and each content area. We believe that these 8 components must be in place for all content areas within your system in order to be acting as a culturally responsive multi-level system of support. So this is a visual way of looking at the parts or the components of a framework. So here are the parts of a bike, and when we put it all together, it makes a framework. And that's how we envision the components of a culturally responsive multi-level system of support. Okay, so going back to our slide, throughout this webinar you will hear a focus on the universal practices, policies, and procedures to ensure that all students, staff, and families are afforded a safe, predictable, and consistent environment that supports learning, growth, and collaboration. This is the basic premise of PBIS. It's a framework, it is not a program or curriculum. Universal supports are provided to all students. 80 to 90% of students will learn the social, emotional, and behavioral expectations provided universal supports. Some students, perhaps 10 to 20%, may need additional support. We then layer additional opportunities for teaching, practice, and feedback in addition to what all other students are provided at Tier 1. Early identification and intervention is critical so that behavioral errors and unhealthy thoughts can be redirected to expected behavior and healthy thoughts. The stronger the universal system, the more students learn what is expected without additional supports. The same applies to the Tier 2 system. The stronger the Tier 2 system, the less students who need intensive supports provided within Tier 3. This allows schools and districts to focus their limited resources on the students who demonstrate the most need. Elizabeth is now going to give you a short walking tour of the Wisconsin School Mental Health Framework. You will see how the framework directly ties to the PBIS framework.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. So we're going to take a short walking tour of the Wisconsin School Mental Health Framework. As Stephanie referenced in the beginning, this is a huge topic, and the framework is no exception to that. So we have half-day and full-day trainings on the framework as well. So if you're interested and you like what you see and you want to hear more information, you can contact me and I can share with you where there'll be additional training. But prior to us even getting into the nuts and the bolts of the framework, what we really need to talk about is what is the philosophical underpinnings of our framework, right? What are the pieces that support this goal? And this really comes from Ross Green's work. For those of you who are not familiar, Ross Green has a website called livesinthebalance.org. I highly recommend you going there and checking out what he has. There's some really great resources, a lot of which we pull from as foundational supports for our framework. But essentially the philosophy that underpins the entire work that we'll talk about today are these three things. One, that students do well if they can. And what we mean by that is that if a student is not doing well, either behaviorally or academically or social emotionally, right, it's not because they don't want to do well. It's not that they're not motivated to do those things. It's that these students are coping the best way they know how to cope, right? That our students may be lacking some skills, right? They may have experiences that they're bringing to the table that are impacting how they're interacting with our environment. The bottom line is that there's something in their way. There's a barrier to that learning, and part of our job is to uncover what that barrier is and to help remove that or teach students how to circumvent those barriers. So in addition to talking about students do well if they can, we also extend that down to parents so that parents engage if they can. So parents have this desire to have a positive influence on their child. They want their children to be successful. They want to provide opportunities for those successes, and they want to hear about those successes. So not just about what's going poorly in their child's circumstances or school life, but also they want to hear about what's going well, and they want to have an active voice in being able to plan for their children's future. So we talk about students and we talk about parents, but it's also extremely important to us, and you'll see this a little bit embedded throughout this presentation, but also we focus a lot on this on our larger presentation. This is this idea of educators, that we as educators do well if we can as well. And we know that there's a lot of pressure on educators. There's a lot of initiatives that float out there. There are, political and community pressures that are at play that are really impacting our abilities to feel good about our jobs. And we know that in order for us to do well by students and to do well by parents, we as educators need to be feeling well about our jobs too. And so we really talk about something called compassion satisfaction, which is this idea that I am giving out emotional energy and I am able to replenish that emotional energy. And if I'm not able to do that, then we're potentially going to fall to compassion fatigue or to burnout, which is something that we want to avoid. So that's our philosophy. Our guide here is the Wisconsin School Mental Health Framework. For those of you who aren't familiar, we have a hard copy framework. It's available online on our website that you can take and save as a PDF. You can print on your own if you'd like. And we're going to talk a little bit about the foundational principles that are inside that framework. So as you can see, the Wisconsin Mental Health Framework is what I call education's favorite shape. We actually borrowed this from public health, so it was theirs before it was ours. But there's some foundational components and then universal components, and then we talk about strategies for students who may need more intensive supports. The foundational components within the Wisconsin School Mental Health Framework are nearly identical to the foundational components that are part of PBIS. This is why we find alignment within PBIS, and this is why we think the integration pieces are not only critical, but PBIS provides this strong foundation for you to do additional school mental health work, because a lot of the pieces that you're already doing, if you're a school who's engaged in PBIS, are already part of our school mental health framework. There are a couple of additions. One is around staff mental health attitudes, competencies, and wellness. And what that means is that if we want staff to start thinking about mental health, right, and intervening on social and emotional and behavioral health, then they need to know what that is, and they need to feel competent and aware about what that is. We also talk about stigma reduction as well, too, because we know that's a huge barrier to kids accessing services. And then, of course, staff wellness being a huge foundational piece, as I just referenced earlier. You can't overstate that enough. It really is a critical piece of this work. The other additional foundational piece that we add is what we call confidentiality, so special confidentiality pieces around mental health. We know that as we start talking about mental health and wellness, as we start talking about students that are coming in with maybe adverse childhood experiences or traumatic experiences, we want to be more mindful of the confidentiality pieces that surround that. So those are the foundational pieces that are embedded within the school mental health framework. And then from there, we talk about universal practices for all. In a little bit, I'll talk about why we take this universal and whole school approach rather than thinking about individual students. But really what we're talking about is rich social emotional learning at the universal level, that we're building relationships with every single student that walks through our doors, and that we're promoting resiliency, and we're promoting ourselves as schools as what we call a protective factor. So we're people that are on the front lines as educators that are really able to do a lot of not just good prevention work, but also help folks and kids that are experiencing mental health issues or mental health challenges. And then from there, we talk about students that are starting to struggle, and what do we do with those students? So this is where we talk about early identification and screening, wellness plan, co-planning with students and with parents. And what we mean by that is sitting down with them and saying, hey, here's what I'm noticing, what are you noticing, and let's get together and talk about that. And then, of course, students that are significantly struggling, and we talk about safety and reentry plans for our students who might be coming back from hospitalization or adjudication, that we really want deep collaboration with youth and families and community providers at this level, and we're really talking about that broad-based wraparound support. Embedded within all this is what we call, up in the cloud there, that linking with systems of care. And really what that means is going beyond, yes, I got this release of information signed at the meeting. I had an IEP meeting, and I heard there was an outside counselor, and so I got this release signed, and now I feel really good about that. This really extends beyond that and doing something with that release of information. So making those connections to those community providers, having those community providers come in and really be embedded within student programming, and really school programming where appropriate as well. So that's that idea of linking with systems of care. We are an important aspect of children's lives. They're with us for a very long time, both in terms of duration of the day and also just duration of their lifetime. But we are not the only people there, and so being able to get on the same page with community providers is extremely important. So that is the framework in a nutshell, and within that we have a goal, right? And our goal within the school mental health framework is to help reduce barriers to students and families and staff by doing exactly what I just talked about. Promoting mental health at all tiers of service, not just for students who are struggling, that we link with those systems of care and we're really wrapping around our community providers, that we promote trauma-sensitive practices, and that we collaborate with communities, with families, and with our youth. And we do that all in a way that's meaningful and manageable through our 3 C's, which are curiosity, connection, and co-planning. And what we mean by meaningful is responsive to your systems. right? So this is not a list of 7 things that need to be done and you check them off and now you can consider yourself a trauma-sensitive school, for example. This is really about saying, what do I know about the students? What do I know about my school community and my community as a whole? And what's going to be meaningful and relevant in terms of practices and procedures that I need to implement, right? So that's the meaningful aspect because you know, what someone may need up in Ashland is going to be different than potentially what someone needs in Milwaukee or in Madison. And the manageable piece is to help combat that initiative fatigue. This is not about looking at that triangle and taking all of these pieces at once. This is really about thinking smart and strategically about what your systems are, doing an analysis where your gaps are at, and picking things that are going to be easy for you to implement, small steps at a time, recognizing the fact that this is a change process that won't happen overnight. So when it comes to the integration between school mental health and a multi-level systems of support, we have 2 documents that we reference. One is the school mental health framework that I already talked about, and one is the interconnected systems framework monolith, I think is the kind of the working title of it, which comes through national PBIS. So we really consider the Wisconsin School Mental Health Framework the what and the why. And in terms of nuts and bolts, it's this advancing education effectiveness document that you'll see, and we'll provide a link to that document later in this webinar. And when we go through our examples today in terms of the tiered fidelity inventory, a lot of what you'll see are examples that are pulled from this guide. So the next thing I want to talk about to help us orient to the fact that this is important work, but work that is embedded at the universal level, is this idea that mental health is a spectrum. So this idea that there's a cycle of wellness that happens where students and staff start well, and then through a series of circumstances and a variety of other factors may become unwell, right? And so they're becoming unwell, and then they're struggling with a mental health issue or challenge, and then they find themselves recovering and then go back to wellness. And it's important for us to talk about this because sometimes when we think about mental health, we always think about mental illness, right? That's where that goes. But truthfully, you can have a person who doesn't experience mental illness, diagnosable mental illness, but still is struggling with wellness. And conversely, you can have someone with a diagnosed mental illness, mental health issue, that is functioning and is doing very, very well. And so it's important for us always to think about that spectrum and where someone's at in terms of their wellness. And all of us can think about our own experiences, whether we're struggling with a diagnosed mental health issue or not, where we've had times in our life where things are going really well, we're rocking and rolling, life feels good for us, and we're feeling good on that wellness spectrum, and other times in our life where maybe other stressors or other things come into play, and we're really struggling with our wellness. So that's the spectrum, and then we're going to talk about why a whole school approach. And our trauma-sensitive schools initiative is a little unique in this. A lot of initiatives that are out there really focus on students that need to access services at the Tier 2 and Tier 3 level. We really focus on whole school first. And why do we do that? Well, one, because it's efficient, right? We know that mental health concerns and adverse childhood experiences and ACEs are extremely common, right? So we know that that happens. And if we need to take those students individually or in small groups, our ability to actually service all of the kids who may have needs is just not possible. There just aren't enough resources in order to do that. But it's also effective, right? Because it's not always obvious to us who have been impacted by these issues. We'll talk in a little bit about our students that experience more internalizing things, so I'm more likely to keep my thoughts and my feelings to myself. Those are students who may be on our spectrum of wellness, who may be becoming unwell, and we may not notice that those things are happening with them until something really gets big, right? Until they're really on the far end of our wellness spectrum. This is what we sometimes call the silent sufferers. I can think of students, for example, who struggle with task persistence or who have a lot of kind of more perfectionist tendencies, and they may go a long time falling into unwellness that we don't notice. And if we take a whole school approach, then we're able to effectively meet the needs of these students, even though they may not be as externalizing as some of our other kids. I also like it because it's proactive rather than reactive. We're focusing on skill building, on social emotional learning, on building resiliency with all students, because we know all students can benefit from that, regardless of if you're a student who's struggling with mental health challenge or if you're just a typical adolescent, let's say, dealing with the ebbs and flows of normal adolescent development. And we're always linking things back to school culture and expectations. And so we're always keeping equity in mind, always keeping what our community values in mind, always keeping our school culture and climate in mind. And finally, this is my favorite part because I'm a practicing school psychologist still as well. This is not just about for pupil service providers to own. This is really about empowering all educators in the building. That we're going to shift adult perspective so that they understand what we're talking about, so that we're working on reducing stigma, and it creates the opportunity for all adults to build resiliency, right? So not just our pupil service providers, not even just our classroom teachers, but I'm talking about our custodians, our recess supervisors, our folks that are in the lunchroom, because those are the people who see kids too on a day-to-day basis, and they may be the first people to interact with someone who's becoming unwell. So when we talk about what does it mean to integrate, what does it mean to embed, what we really talk about is embedding and threading practices for resiliency. So all of our students need to access universal strategies, and for our students who are feeling well on our wellness spectrum, that's where they need to access those services. But as our students become unwell, right, and find themselves maybe a little bit more unwell, then we're going to move into Tier 2 and Tier 3 intensive supports for those students. And then as our students recover from whatever challenge that they were faced, they're able to go back to the universal pieces with learned coping strategies and universal supports. But the key piece here is that those universal strategies, those things that we embed for all students, pervade throughout. So it doesn't matter if you're a student who's accessing services at the Tier 3 level for mental or behavioral health, that you have access to those universal strategies, because at the end of the day, being back in those classrooms with those universal strategies are really what's going to help not just promote your recovery, but sustain it as well. So we can think about this from the perspective of student snapshot. This is Dion. And for those of you who have had a lot of PBIS training, this triangle is probably going to look pretty familiar to you, right? So this is the concept that Dion, or any other student, right, accesses the particular services that he needs at whatever particular time he may need them. So for Dion, hallway behavior is something that he accesses only universal supports for. The universal supports work really well for him, and same thing for attendance and for science. But you can see for reading and for math, right, a little bit maybe in PE, is where we start to see an increase and a change in those supports. And the reason why we show this is because it's the same for wellness or for mental health as it is for academics. In that if I'm struggling and I'm having a challenging moment, right, that I'm not challenging all the time, that those moments aren't happening for me all the time. That I'm able to access the supports and services when I need them, and the adult-led behavior change in those environments help to support that, and the interventions I'm receiving help to support that. But the other times of my life, right, I'm being supported by the universal pieces. Oops, sorry, I double-clicked.
So during this 1 hour, we're going to focus on some key features: the importance of consistent and predictable environments. Community, family, and student voice is critical to a truly integrated system. We're going to expand our data collection techniques to include information from a variety of sources and behavior types. And we're going to emphasize how Tier 2 and 3 supports are directly tied to universal practices. And we're going to do that by talking about this tool. Before we talk about the features, let's talk about the tool, how we can support, how this tool can help support you in this work. The ISF Action Planning Companion Guide is one of the materials in your materials area. And the guide is based on the Tiered-Fidelity Inventory, a PBIS fidelity measure also known as the TFI. The Action Planning Guide provides enhancements that promotes mental health for all, demonstrates how to develop a single system of delivery, and moves beyond access to improved and specific outcomes for all students. You will see examples of TFI items and the enhancements as we move through this webinar. So here is an example of from the Action Planning Guide. You'll see this structure on some slides throughout the rest of this webinar. This is the second item in the Tier 1 part of the TFI, and the PBIS Big Idea explains the item, and the ISF Big Idea explains the mental health enhancement. So we're just showing you this as an example because we're going to refer to this structure as we go through the rest of the webinar. So the first key feature that we're going to talk about today is developing consistent and predictable environments. Learning not only requires the teaching of skills, it requires the conditions or an environment that supports learning. 4 tenets at the core of PBIS are predictable, consistent, positive, and safe. Establishing practice and policies and procedures that ensure a predictable, consistent, positive, and safe environment allows for students to learn, grow, and collaborate. As Rob Horner from the National Technical Assistance Center for PBIS states, the fundamental purpose of PBIS is to make schools more effective and equitable learning environments. The principles and practices of trauma-sensitive schools are based on 5 values as defined by Roger Vallet and Maxine Harris. These values tie directly to the positive culture and predictable, consistent, and safe environments at the core of PBIS. Safety is not just physical safety. It includes emotional safety for all students and families. At the core is the development of safe, healthy relationships that are strongly based in trust. This includes having clear expectations. Staff empower students and families by intentionally reaching out and providing opportunities to hear the voices and provide the choices to our students and the families. Empowering students and families to be engaged in their education and education of their students promotes a safe, trustworthy, and collaborative environment. So here is the first slide that is reflecting the TFI and the ISF guide. This is about establishing expectations that are clear and positive and teaching those expectations to all staff, students, and families so that we're promoting that consistent, predictable, and safe environment. When we think behavior, we often think of aggressive actions or actions we don't want to see. The mental health big idea focuses on the inclusion of social and emotional skills as expectations. Yes, expectations around voice volume and procedures in the hallway and in the classrooms in the schools are very important, as well as how to get along with others, how to accept feedback, how to regulate emotions, and so on. So let's take a look at the first enhancement. Is the universal social emotional curriculum connected to expectations? Consider the following questions. What is the social emotional curriculum in your school? What competencies are taught? Who teaches the social emotional skills? Are these expectations known by all staff so that teaching is reinforced and positively acknowledged by all? Or is the social emotional curriculum taught by and lived within the school counselor? Let's look at 2 behavioral matrices that include social emotional skills. Here is a behavior matrix with the expectations of be responsible and be respectful and large for a closer look at some of the social and emotional skills within these areas. Under be responsible, we have ask for help and offer help. Asking for help is an advocacy skill necessary in life. Offering for help is a social skill. Offering help is a social skill. So we can also look at and talk about the reciprocal relationship between these 2 skills. Under respectful examples are use whole body listening. This is a specific social thinking curriculum that a school might use and tie directly into their expectations. Also under be responsible is use calming strategies to remain calm. Ask a peer to play and greet the driver. There's a difference between listen to the bus driver and greet the driver. Listen to the driver is often considered a safety expectation. But greeting the driver goes beyond that to modeling respect and showing respect to the driver and wanting to develop the relationship with the bus driver. These social emotional skills are taught, reinforced, and acknowledged by all staff within the school. Here's an example of a high school matrix. Throughout this matrix, there are examples of social and emotional skills that tie directly to academic success. For example, under Be Responsible in the class-wide column, you see regulate emotions to handle stress, control impulses, and persevere in overcoming obstacles. If someone is taught these skills and successful at utilizing them, we see an absence of observable behavior. We may not know the person's feeling until it is expressed in a verbally assertive manner. However, if someone does not have the skills of regulating emotion, we may see this via behavior such as withdrawing from participation and/or escalation. These skills are not only critical to success in school, but also all other environments and our internal well-being. So when we're talking about how do we engage and support families to establish, teach, and reinforce behavioral, social, and emotional expectations at home? In doing so, we are sharing with families how we support behavioral, social, and emotional expectations within our school environment, and how expectations can be established and positively acknowledged at home. So here is a skeleton of an example behavior matrix that schools can assist families in completing. So using this matrix, families can be guided with questioning on how to establish clear expectations. So our second feature is community, family, and student voice is essential to an effective system. And this is clear throughout this whole webinar and what Elizabeth had talked to about earlier in the webinar as well. Knowing and understanding family, students, and the community allows for strong connections in response to the values of the stakeholders. So this item talks about who is on your PBIS or leadership team. Who sits on the team? Who is representing not only your school and the different stakeholders at your school, but also the community and the families and the students as well. So here is a list of roles that could be or should be on a PBIS team, excuse me. There's this big delay in the slides that we're seeing, so we're not sure if it's us or if it's really a big delay to everybody else.
Yeah, sorry about that. We're having some technical difficulties with the slide lag here.
This slide, yeah. Okay, so this is the team makeup or team composition. Who sits on your team beyond the school personnel? Do you have at least one family member that brings the voice of other families? Do you have long-standing businesses in your community that employ a significant number of community members? Think about what a business can bring to the table in terms of the values that they're looking for in their employees. A family and community committee is a way to get stakeholder engagement. This group could have a representative committee member and family member or two that brings information to and from the PBIS or leadership team. What community agencies play a role in understanding social emotional development and mental health and wellness? Agencies such as a county behavioral health agency or a clinical agency within your community can add more information to your and data to your Tier 1 discussion. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. How can we get other voices to the table?
So one way in which we talk about getting other voices to the table are in regards to our teaching expectations. So one of the things that we do as part of PBIS broadly is that we teach expected academic and social behaviors directly to students in classrooms and across all other campuses and settings and locations, right? Like that's part of what the matrix is. When we think about this from a school mental health lens, we want to fold in a review of both community and school data, right, that's supported by family input that leads to the selection of social emotional instruction that promotes overall wellness for students. So this isn't just about looking at our school data, this is also about engaging our parents and our broader community about what these pieces might look like. And so there's an example that will pop up on your screen. I know we've got a delay here, so I'll give it a second before it pops up. But something that was created in a district local here is one of my previous districts. And the feedback that we were getting from parents a lot was this whole idea around bullying, right? We're getting a lot of questions around bullying and is this bullying, is it not? And we had a universal SEL curriculum and we also had an anti-bullying curriculum as well, but we were still getting this information and these questions from parents. And so what we had decided to do based on that family input, that data point saying that our community is confused about this, wants to know, is that we put together a learning opportunity for our families based on what do a variety of disagreements look like, because not every conflict is bullying. And so we were able to talk about this is teasing versus conflict versus a mean moment. We had a YouTube video that went along with this that not my finest moment on the small screen, but did get a lot of hits. And it was a way for us to teach this explicitly to our students, but also share with our families so that they can reinforce these pieces at home. So our key feature, our next key feature is this idea of expanded data collection. And what we mean by that is we had talked earlier, I had referenced earlier about students that have more internalizing, right? So students that you may not suspect or expect to be starting to become unwell in our spectrum, but who actually are struggling. And so we want to make sure that our data collection efforts are expanded so that we're not only seeing the students that are more externalizing, right, who are regularly showing us that life is not working well for them here at school, but also for our students that are internalizing. So again, you'll see the same theme here, right, that our problem behavior definitions involve community and family and student input, and it expands this view so it's not just the students that are getting sent to the office necessarily and getting in trouble that way. So here's another example of what this might look like, a way that you could do expanded data collection, if you'd say. So rather than tracking office disciplinary referrals proper, although we did track those as well, we started just tracking office visits. Who shows up to the office and why are they there? Because not everyone comes to the office because they're in trouble. We have a lot of students that access the health office on a regular basis who may actually be experiencing mental health issue or challenge, but it's manifesting in a way that sends them to the health office all the time. So you want to start tracking those. We also wanted to start tracking the kids who without fail will raise their hand to volunteer to leave that class, right? The kids are like, yes, I will make 10,000 copies. Yes, I will run that errand for you, right? We want to know those students too, because maybe those students are just big helpers, or maybe those students are trying to get out of a work situation in a more adaptive way. So we're able to figure out exactly what it was that students were doing when they were in the office. But to me, more important than that, or I guess equally as important to that, is what do we do with you when you were there, right? It's great, we sent you to the office, maybe because you were in trouble or maybe because something else was happening in your life, but what happened to you while you were there? So we started to track whether or not students were having a fix-it plan, or they had to do an apology activity or some kind of restorative activity, whether or not we worked on an emotional regulation plan with them, or if they were meeting with student services. So that way we could go back and track and say, this kid's been in the office 7 times, he's completed 7 fix-it plans. Fix-it plan isn't working as an intervention for him. We need to look back at our broader data and ratchet up our supports for that student. And then, of course, we were able to give feedback to the teachers so they knew exactly what's happening. As you all are very well aware, that teacher communication piece is extremely important and often a piece that's lagging, I think, once kids leave their homeroom classes and end up maybe in student services or in the office. So the other thing, oh, this is you. Got excited. I got overzealous to talk.
So it's critical that we know and understand our students, and this is another way of looking at expanded data, and not just the students as they are portray themselves at school, but our students overall. What does each student bring with them when they enter our school doors? We don't have influence over all aspects of our students' lives. However, we do have influence over how we interact with students while they are in our schools. So community data can expand perspective to make more informed decisions regarding interventions and support that need to be put in place for all of our students. So here are some examples of community data that could impact our relationship with students and families. For example, if you were aware of the statistic that 80% of the 40% of students that are Native American live on the reservation, and that the reservation is holding a powwow this weekend, how could you engage students around this? Could asking your students and talking to your students make a connection with your students? If a larger employee within your district reports that in the past 5 years they have had an incline in the number of employees they've fired due to being late, how could this impact your teaching and feedback around being prompt at your high school, for example? If 65% of students in ABC Elementary School have at least one parent incarcerated, how could that impact our universal supports? If the mental health agency within the county in which your district resides notes an increase of 17% in the diagnosis of depression in 13 to 18-year-olds compared to last year, what might you do differently? So by having those community providers at the table, we can gather more information and data about our community, things that impact our families and our students. Our fourth key feature is that Tier 2 and 3 supports are directly tied to universal practices. Tier 2 supports are supports provided in addition to universal supports. We've said that throughout this webinar. Students who need additional supports beyond universal receive universal supports and additional teaching, practice, and acknowledgement of the skills. Tier 2 supports are directly linked to Tier 1 supports. If we don't teach the skill to all students, then we can't provide an intervention for that skill at advanced tiers. We can't provide an intervention on a skill that we haven't taught. If you think about this with an academic lens, we would not think to place a student in math intervention if we didn't teach the skill at the universal level first. Tier 2 supports provide additional teaching and practice, like I've said, and feedback. This feedback happens across the day in multiple settings. Therefore, all staff need to participate in the intervention. Professional development around the staff's role in Tier 2 critical features, including their role in providing prompts, pre-corrects, and reinforcement of skills being taught, is imperative. Also consider the professional development that plays a role in all staff understanding internalizing behavior and early indicators of risk. So remember this example matrix from an earlier slide that I talked about. Our focus was on the social and emotional features within the matrix at the universal level. We focused on, right now we're going to focus on using calming strategies to remain calm and how it's taught to all students at the universal level. And we're going to talk about this social academic instruction group that should be coming up right now that was at an elementary school. The social academic instruction group is tied to the skills of remain calm using calming strategy from the matrix. The students receive universal teaching, practice, and feedback on the skill using the second step curriculum, just like all other students in the school. Based on data, it was determined that a small group of students needed additional teaching, practice, and feedback to learn the skills needed to remain calm. So they were, this was done using a social academic instruction group format. This is the daily progress report that was used for the students, whoops, hold on a second, in the group, on the emotional regulation group. This DPR, the DPR is a progress monitoring tool that collects data on the impact of the intervention. So this group, the focus was, I used a strategy to tame my frustration, my strategy allowed others to work, and I got back to work. It also serves as a prompt to the adults that are reflecting on the, giving the feedback that this, of what to give the feedback on. And next is an example of another daily progress report that a middle or high school student might use. For example, if a student has negative self-talk or thoughts, this would be something for more of that internalizing reflection. These are examples of using the 3 to 5 expectations for self-reflection. As a reminder to the student, the DPR could also have a place that the student writes the coping strategy or strategies that he or she is using. The teacher's role in this example, the feedback role could be limited because it is self-reflection. Depending on the student, the teacher could provide the prompt of have you self-reflected or something like that. And this DPR might be associated with a support provided by the school counselor, school social worker, or school psychologist.
So those are examples of ratcheted up supports at the Tier 2 level. One of the primary questions that I get is, well, what about students who are really struggling, right? So our students who need to access services at the Tier 3 level. And so I want to really talk for a few minutes about what this looks like in terms of comprehensive support. So we already have this idea that we're using our data annually and that we're creating these behavior support plans that consider prevention strategies and teaching strategies and all those pieces that are part of a good behavior support plan. The school mental health big idea, the add-on to this, the embed into this, is this idea, you'll notice a theme here, that community partners and families can contribute a needed perspective in the development of a comprehensive behavior support plan. And that by doing that, by expanding our stakeholders that talk about this, right, and having these open conversations, we actually can have more robust plans than we normally would, and I would say probably more effective plans, especially in terms of long-term sustainability. So here's an example of what that might look like. This is what we call a complex FBA with wraparound features. So here are presenting concerns. Here's a student with significant aggression towards staff, leaving the building all the time, destroying property all the time, right? Sound familiar? I feel like all of us have in our careers one or more students that have experienced these things. So we do a traditional FBA with all the components that are outlined in a good FBA, but in addition to that, the FBA had in it a comprehensive parent interview, a trigger profile from parents that was 3 pages long. Parents actually wrote up what they noticed about their child from their sensory perspective and their home lens. That we had summary and recommendations from the outside occupational therapist, summary and recommendations from an outside psychologist, and a full script of the student interview as part of the original FBA documentation. And why that's so critical to have all of those components is because as we're self-reflecting back on our data, we can go through those pieces and say, okay, in addition to the school data, who else is noticing change, including being able to use that student interview then to gauge internal changes within that student. So as a result of doing all of this, the FBA meeting actually led to several things. One, increased collaboration between school and community providers, and if you haven't heard it enough yet, you'll hear again how important that is in terms of really doing whole child approach to learning and to behavior reduction. The student actually had increased compliance in his outside psychologist, and so he was really struggling establishing rapport and a relationship with the outside psychologist. And by us all getting on the same page and developing some shared goals and some shared language, trading tips and tricks with each other about how to establish a relationship with this student, he actually was able to engage in his outside psych even more, right? Which means then in turn that those skills are going to build faster. And then we had development of shared goals for all service providers and home. And so all of us were on the same page, working within our each individual settings, but all focused on those same pieces. So here's an example of what the student interview was, right? So this is just excerpts from it. This particular student was a very young child, right? What are you good at? Well, I'm good at petting my dog and karate, right? How do you feel about school and your schoolwork? Well, it's uncomfortable, it's boring. And you can see the drill down in there in that example. But here's the key to it. Tell me what would make school better for you, right? And this question comes in a lot of forms. Sometimes we call it the magic wand question. If you had a magic wand and you could change anything, what would it be? And this student said, I wish my parents could come to school with me every day. So when we did our brainstorming as part of our FBA, the first solution, right, true brainstorming, all ideas are good ideas. The first solution that was generated was that, right on the board. I wish mom and dad could come to school with me every day. Now, when we think about those initial values of, predictability and safety, and we think about those trauma-informed care values as well, to me this screams that this child is not feeling safe in our environment. Because you don't need your parents to come with you in an environment where you can transfer whatever safety they bring to you. So it reframed how we did our action planning and our brainstorming for us to be able to say, okay, how do we take the concept of that idea, which can't live, right? Parents cannot come to school with him every day, but how can we take what those features are and fill that in so that he feels like the people that he is with function as the same role, that same safety component as his parents. So this is an example of the action plan. And I just want you to notice that on the who end, everybody had a stake in an action item. So this wasn't school personnel or community personnel or parents all doing one thing. This is all shared responsibility. Going back to the good features of an FBA, we also talk about kind of our setting event, our antecedent strategies, our teaching strategies, and then our consequence strategies. And there are a couple of things that I want to point out because even for our most intensive students, it's extremely important to have those universal practices embedded into their behavior plans. So for this particular student, we did a lot of pre-corrects. That's a universal strategy. We developed common language scripts among all the adults. That's a universal strategy. We used the same acknowledgement system that were being used at the universal level. When and why we use the acknowledgement system changed, right? Same thing that when you saw that DPR earlier for that SAG group, right? What we're noticing and what we're acknowledging changes, but the actual acknowledgement system is the same. So even though the student was accessing behavioral supports at the Tier 3 level, the concepts around those universal strategies continue to be embedded into those practices and procedures. So you may find yourselves at this point asking, what is next? This is a picture of my son. I use this one a lot anytime I'm presenting. Oh, thanks, Stephanie. Anytime I'm presenting on a topic that feels very big and very overwhelming, because I feel like that's just like the face, that just captures his face right now, right? Like, what in the world just happened to me? It is 4:07 here on a Monday afternoon, the end of April. Life is hard right now. So you may be asking yourself, what am I supposed to do next with this information, given where I'm at in my current school life? What we want to do is we want to just give you a minute to think about what you can do just in the next month for your system. Remember, we're talking meaningful and manageable. So this is not taking a big chunk off and saying, yes, starting next week, I'm going to do universal SEL K through 12, right? Like, that's not reasonable. So here's some ideas of things that will help to advance this work that you may not have thought of as a good enough action item. Our educators, I feel like we're always like, oh, is it good enough? Is it good enough? You can share the webinar. You can review the school mental health framework. You can watch a trauma-sensitive schools module. We've got 14 with another one coming on the way that are all available for you to use. They vary in length, but they're somewhere between 40 minutes and an hour. You can review the Mental Health Companion Guide to the Tiered-Fidelity Inventory, which is linked in your materials. You can expand your team and say, hey, who are we missing on our team? What data points do we want? That's not an exhaustive list of things you can do, but we present that list to you so you can think about any one thing that you do is going to advance this work. Even if you just share this webinar with another colleague or say, hey, I heard this and this is a cool thing I got out of it. So we're going to give you a minute to do that. I promised Stephanie that I'd give you an actual minute because I don't mind silence, but silence on a webinar when I can't look at anybody always makes me a little uncomfortable, but I'm going to do it this time. So give you a minute of silence. So Stephanie gave me the go-ahead to talk with you again, so I'm going to, because I'm mindful of the fact that it's 4:10, and the fact that you're still sitting in your offices listening to us is greatly appreciated. So here are some resources and tools. We never want to leave you without any kind of resources and tools. I highly recommend that you visit the Wisconsin School Mental Health website. We have a variety of resources on there, stuff that DPI has created, stuff that we've linked to other places. We've got emotional regulation plans that are available there as well. And it gets updated regularly because we're always innovating on my team. We're always thinking through these things and really trying hard to push things out to the field that are going to be useful to you and not just, you know, a white paper or something more theoretical. So I highly recommend going to that. I've also linked you to the Trauma-Sensitive Schools Learning modules. As I referenced before, we have 14 that are currently up available at the universal level. There'll be a 15th one that talks about readiness at Tier 2 and Tier 3. But start with the universal ones first, and then as this next year unfolds, we're working on the trauma-sensitive school modules for Tier 2 and Tier 3, so be on the lookout for those. But those are available on demand, free for you to use. And then, of course, the PBIS network site, which we would love for you to visit. You can access trainings there, contact your RTAC, a variety of resources there as well. The last resource we want to give you, because we referenced it, and it seems a little bit unfair if we don't, is the Advancing Education Effectiveness, Interconnecting School Mental Health and School-Wide Positive Behavior Support. Lucille Eber, Susan Barrick, and Mark Weist are the editors on that. It really does have a wealth of information and a wealth of knowledge on there. They also have some webinars that are available on their website, and you can download the entire monolith free of charge there. So with that, we've got a few minutes left. We'll take any questions that you may have. Otherwise, we thank you very much for being here with us today. Trust me, like I said earlier, I'm still a practitioner part-time. I understand what this time of year feels like, especially this time of day, and so I highly appreciate that.